Do you remember the 1.4 chasm with Baizhu and Dendrocopium leaks? Cause I sure do. Man, those were some nostalgic times for Genshin Impact, I'll tell you that much. If you don't remember or don't know what I'm talking about, all you need to know is that after almost 3 years of Baizhu's existence in the story, we finally get to play him. He fills a fairly empty role as a Dendro healer and mini shielder, joining Yao Yao as one of the Dendro survivability options. As always, this guide will teach you everything you need to know about Baizhu, from his best artifacts and weapons to general playstyle and team compositions. Without further ado, let's get this guide rolling. Baizhu's elemental skill is quite unique and simple. He sends out a spirit that deals Dendro damage to up to 3 enemies in an area around him and then returns to the player to heal the party. Unfortunately, the damage scales on attack and the healing scales on his max HP, which means that for the most part, the damage from this ability is negligible, as we mainly want to focus on the big heals for the party. Like Baizhu's skill, Baizhu's burst also has an attack-based damage and HP-based survivability mechanic. Upon casting Baizhu's elemental burst, it will create a shield for the active character. This shield only lasts for 2.5 seconds and has a very low damage absorption compared to other shields in the game, but that's where the rest of Baizhu's burst comes into play. Not only does the shield have a 2.5 second duration, but it also refreshes itself every 2.5 seconds as well. Every time the shield refreshes or is broken, your active character will be healed based on Baizhu's max HP, and a Dendro spirit will emerge to attack a nearby enemy based on Baizhu's attack. With Baizhu's second Ascension talent, the character who is healed by this shield will gain increased bloom reaction damage as well as increased aggravate and spread reaction damage. This buff is calculated with every 1000 HP increment that Baizhu has up to 50,000 max HP. Specifically, aggravate and spread reactions gain 0.8% increased damage for every 1000 HP that Baizhu has, so that equates to 40% when Baizhu is at 50,000 HP. Meanwhile, bloom reactions gain a little more than that at 2% per 1000 max HP that Baizhu has, which maxes out at 100% increased damage with the 50,000 cap. No matter how small the shield is, blocking any damage with a shield will prevent the character from being knocked off their feet, which means a benefit of Baizhu's burst is a pseudo resistance to interruption when his mini shields block damage. Baizhu is a really cool character on paper, but as we take a deeper dive into his mechanics, he doesn't come without his minor issues. The first issue is very common among other characters, and that issue is energy. Baizhu has the standard restrictive burst cost of 80 energy with a 20-second cooldown, while his elemental skill generates 3 to 4 particles on a 10-second cooldown. Of course, this restrictive burst cost can be met with help from other Dendro teammates or energy recharge weapons like Jadefall Splendor, Prototype Amber, or Favonius Codex. However, I want you to note that the energy recharge benchmarks heavily change based on the type of team that you play. For example, teams like Nilou Bloom give Baizhu more field time to absorb energy particles and cast 2 elemental skills, while in a C0 hypercarry team, C0 often hogs too much time for Baizhu to absorb particles or cast his skill a second time. The second issue is lack of AoE damage. His catalyst attacks are similar to Heijo in the sense that they are melee, but they lack the sweeping AoE that Heijo has. Not only does Baizhu lose the advantage of range, but he also loses Dendro application in situations with multiple enemies. Nahida attacks in a fixed line in front of her and can apply Dendro to multiple enemies in that line. Once we add in the elemental skills of these 2 Dendro catalysts, it becomes no contest that Nahida is the queen of AoE Dendro application. Baizhu's burst applies Dendro every single hit, but unfortunately the AoE on each hit is practically non-existent. This ultimately results in a limitation for solo Dendro application in specific teams like triple Hydro Nilou setups, so he's not a replacement for Nahida. Baizhu's Constellations are not very game-changing given how much Constellations will cost you, so let's just quickly run through their biggest effects. Like many other first Constellations, Baizhu gains an extra charge on his elemental skill with C1. This is a solid first constellation that gives him better energy generation and flexibility when it comes to certain team rotations, but it's nothing to chase after. C2 grants Baizhu the ability to unleash a miniature elemental skill every 5 seconds when your active character hits an enemy. Because C2 is a miniature version of his elemental skill, the healing is only 20% of what his normal skill would heal for, but the biggest catch of C2 is that it can also apply Dendro, increasing his rate of Dendro application. C4 is a team-wide 80 elemental mastery buff, but this number is quite small even when compared to 4-star artifacts like the 4-set instructor, so it's a bit unfortunate that C4 is nothing more than a stepping stone to C6. Regarding C6 itself, it increases Baizhu's burst damage based on his max HP, and when elemental skills or his C2 effect hits an enemy, it will generate one of his shields from his elemental burst. As you would probably guess, since his shields also launch Dendro attacks when they expire or break, creating extra shields once again can increase Baizhu's rate of Dendro application, but is very expensive to justify chasing C6. It's much easier to pair him with Dendro characters like Dendro Traveler and Kale because they're free, or Nahida and Yao Yao since they've been available recently and many players might have them. Similar to Yao Yao, Baizhu prefers simple healer builds due to his split scaling and low damage multipliers. The two safest artifact sets for Baizhu are either the 4-set Deepwood Memories or the 4-set Ocean Hued Clam. In the case that no other character on your Bloom, Burgeon, or Hyperbloom teams can hold this set, Baizhu should hold this set to reduce the Dendro res of enemies and buff the damage output of your Bloom DPS. If this is a scenario that doesn't apply to you, then the 4-set Ocean Hued Clam is your best generalist set. Baizhu constantly grants big heals to the team when his shields expire or break, so it's pretty easy to get free damage out of Ocean Hued Clam's bubble. While this free damage is definitely nice, some may prefer to use Baizhu for solely buffing the team and don't really care about his damage contribution or healing output. In that case, the 4-set Noblesse Oblige or the 4-set Instructor are your go-to options for team buffs, each with their own strengths. For example, the 4-set Instructor can shine in a Nilou Bloom team where the attack percent from Noblesse is negligible with characters like Nilou and Kokomi who have HP scalings. Another example would be an Aggravate team where your Electro DPS may have enough EM buffs from a character like Sucrose and would prefer the 20% attack from Noblesse since maybe you're not running an attack buffer like Bennett or Kujo Sara. Choosing between these two sets is purely up to your own evaluation of what type of team you want to build with Baizhu, but both are nice options and easy to farm, so don't be afraid to switch around later down the line. Regardless of what set you run on Baizhu, his artifact stats are Energy Recharge or HP in the Sands, HP in the Goblet, and HP or Healing bonus in the Circlet. Energy Recharge in the Sands is highly recommended, especially if you run a weapon without an Energy Recharge stat or passive. Otherwise, it's pretty standard to run healing bonus in the Circlet and HP everywhere else to maximize healing, with HP in the Circlet as a substitute if you don't have a healing bonus Circlet yet. Substat focus should be as much energy recharge as possible, and then HP for healing and elemental mastery for Nilou Bloom teams. I've already alluded to the fact that Baizhu heavily relies on energy from his weapons to not have insane energy recharge requirements in artifacts, and already name dropped a few weapons, so let's go over the best catalysts right now. The two weapons that you want to prioritize on Baizhu are his signature weapon Jadefall's Splendor and the craftable 4-star prototype Amber. It's undeniable that Jadefall's passive is wonderful for energy generation, but with how little damage Baizhu does at a base level, the passive's elemental damage bonus goes to waste. It is not recommended to pull for this weapon unless you just love Baizhu because Prototype Amber exists. Prototype Amber is the free-to-play option of Jadefall, also providing energy over time when casting an elemental burst. Some other options aside from these two best options are Everlasting Moonglow and 1,000 Floating Dreams. These 5-star catalysts are delicacies for whales who have extra copies of them. Everlasting Moonglow is just a pure stat stick for healing bonus and HP, while 1,000 Floating Dreams provides a small EM buff in exchange for having no energy recharge stats or passive. Other free-to-play friendly options for Baizhu include Favonius Codex and Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers. Just like 1,000 Floating Dreams, the idea of Thrilling Tales is to provide buffs to your team, but it also provides no solution to Baizhu's energy problems. Favonius Codex is a part of one of the best 4-star weapon lines in the game, and it can work wonderfully on Baizhu given that it provides a hefty amount of energy and he doesn't need to focus damage stats. Moving into the last section, teams are pretty standard for Baizhu given that he doesn't really do anything special. He's a solid choice in the several different Dendro archetype teams, and Nilou Bloom highlights that flexibility he provides to teams. The Nilou and Baizhu pairing always runs the pair plus one more Dendro character and one more Hydro character. Without Baizhu's healing, most of the time the Hydro slot had to be Kokomi or Barbara for healing unless you also have Yao Yao. Baizhu adds a layer of flexibility to choose an offensive Hydro character like Shengqiu, Yelan, Ayato, and Child, but you can also still choose the defensive options with Kokomi and Barbara. The second Dendro character should provide sustained Dendro application, which means Nahida is your best option, and Dendro MC is your best free-to-play option. However, Kole and Yaoyao's shorter duration of Dendro application also work fine if you decide to on-field Baizhu for Dendro catalyst attacks or have Baizhu C2/C6, which increase his rate of Dendro application off-field. Another archetype where it's easy to see the effects of flexibility that Baizhu provides to teams is in Quicken and Aggravate. Before Yaoyao and Baizhu, these teams were locked into two options. Either you forfeited a second Electro DPS to run Dori or Kuki Shinobu for healing to keep Kazuha or Sucrose in the squad, or you dropped Kazuha/Sucrose for a defensive option with Jean, Sayu, Kokomi, C6 Diona, etc. With Yaoyao and now Baizhu, this issue is solved. What makes a Baizhu an upgrade over Yaoyao in these Aggravate teams is Baiju's Ascension talent that provides extra Aggravate and spread reaction damage. This can be non-negligible, especially for characters like C0 who take a long time on the field and get a lot of Aggravate reactions in one rotation. Generally, the team consists of your main Electro DPS, Baizhu, an off-field Electro DPS, and either Kazuha or Sucrose in the last slot for extra buffs, or an off-field Hydro character for a Quickbloom setup which offers both Hyperbloom and Aggravate reactions at the same time. Main Electro DPS characters are your on-field characters like C0, Keqing, Raiden, or Razor, while the off-field Electro DPS characters are more along the lines of Yai Miko, Fischl, and Beidou. The Hydro characters you can pick to pair with characters like C0 or Keqing for Quickbloom are generally Xingqiu, Yelan, or Kokomi, given how sustainable their off-field Hydro application is. The last team archetype to consider is Hyperbloom and Burgeon, which use very similar options to that of an Aggravate team. However, instead of an on-field Electro DPS, we now have a dedicated off-field Hyperbloom and Burgeon trigger with Kuki Shinobu and Toma respectively. Other teammates should include a mandatory Hydro character and a flex slot that usually consists of another Hydro or Dendro applicator. 99% of the time, you're going to want to select a second Dendro character in the last slot, given that Baiju's Dendro application is slow and Pyro can eat up your Dendro application with burning. The options outside of Baizhu generally include Nahida, Dendro MC, Yaoyao, or Kole as per usual. Unfortunately, since Kuki and Toma are going to be off-field triggers for Hyperbloom and Burgeon, it will be hard to make use of Baiju's Ascension talent for the extra Bloom reaction damage. This is because the effect only lingers for 6 seconds and the effect only refreshes for the on-field character. It's a bit of an inconvenience to constantly switch back into Kuki and Toma, so generally don't worry about utilizing this buff too much. With that, let me know your thoughts, builds, and teams for Baizhu down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this guide or thought it was useful, be sure to support both the video and the channel. You can follow me on Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, or sub to the YouTube channel, whatever people do nowadays. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.